Good afternoon. So, welcome to the show. Today I have Devang Toshniwal. He's a Kolkata guy, now settled in Warburg Pincus in Singapore. So there is a lot of black box surrounding how a chartered accountant can really enter the storied world of management consulting and then private equity. You will generally be told that, unless you are an MBA from the Holy Trinity, IIM, ABC, you cannot enter into management consulting or in private equity, or let's say in management consulting, you are a CA with a ranker. So a couple of positions come up now and then, but broadly, this remains an area with a lot of enigma surrounding it. So today I thought I'll have Devang demystify this. And he's in the midst of a deal. So it's been like I have taken specifically 22 minutes from him, from his calendar. So, so welcome to the show, Devang. It's been a pleasure having
Thank,
you.
thank you so much. Thanks, Anurag. I think I've heard about you a lot, and as I had mentioned previously, great initiative. So first of all, would like to take a moment and say kudos to that. We can make 22 minutes, 25 minutes as well. I'm not that starved with time. Not on a Saturday afternoon, at least. Um, Thank you for your kind words. I think it's true. There is a black hole in terms of understanding, or black box in terms of understanding the process around getting into consulting as well as private equity for chartered accountants, especially young aspirants, and would be happy to answer the questions that you have on that as well.
All right. So, so as you grew up in the city of Kolkata, Bharati Vidya Bhavan, so tell us one instance in your childhood that really transformed you, probably something, a story, an incident. This is one question that I always ask people.
Yeah, I should have seen a couple of interviews that you have taken. No, I think okay. So identifying one specific situation is tough. There are many things which come to mind, but there were a few instances that happened long back, and you tend to forget. So I'll pick up something which happened in the last 2 years in my school. From childhood, right from the very beginning, I was someone who had made his mind to take up science as a stream, and not many people know about it. And I also started pursuing science, and I went to Kota, but just because I felt homesick, I came back and I took up commerce. And I think that was one of the biggest decisions that I took with the least amount of thought, I would say. But yeah, I think that happened. It was a tender age, I guess, and since then, the school life that I had, um, it was one of those turning points in the life where you realize a lot of things about yourself, and you realize how to think about it, how does that impact your life only later. And in hindsight, I can say that it was a poorly thought decision, but it was not the worst decision that I could have made. And I think that was one of those. It would be one of those things which had the largest impact. I started becoming a bit insecure and underconfident when I came back to Kolkata from Kota. And right in the first 6 months, I just found my place to settle in, sink back in the commerce stream. And then I was made the head boy of the school. And there was so much additional responsibility. It was not like a big thing that there was no election sort of thing. It is something which all the teachers, principals decide together. But I think once that responsibility started coming in, and once there was more interaction, communication, things started getting back in place. I think that process was one of those impactful processes in my life, in my childhood, school days, I would say.
Oh, I can completely relate to that, Devang, because once I became a CA, I had got a job in ITC. I went to Gurgaon, and homesickness just drew me back to Kolkata. I came back at half of the salary. I mean, yeah, homesickness is something which beats all rationality. And when you come
Yes,
back, you kind of regret that, hey, I made a wrong decision probably. And then it takes time for you to rediscover your mojo. But I think all this just happens. You should just
that's
flow with
true.
the time. So my next question, that you went into Xavier's and then from there into PwC articleship. A Big Four articleship means a lot for people. So with Big Four articleship, what is the tangible difference it creates? One, from a CA final preparation standpoint, I mean, clearing quickly CA final, does that become an obstruction? And then the second part, placements both post CA. So does that Big Four ka chap help you in some way?
So, okay, let me take these two questions separately, actually, Anurag. On the first point, which is whether it creates a barrier in getting through your examinations at the first go, I think no, it does not. Just think about it. You join your articleship 2.5 years before you are about to give your exam. And for most of the folks that I know, I can vouch for the fact that the first 1.5 to 2 years do not go into studying as much. It's only the last 6 months to 1 year which typically goes into preparing oneself for the examination. So I wouldn't say a Big Four articleship really puts you on a back foot in terms of that. It is true that whenever you join a Big Four, it is important for you to protect your timings towards the end of your articleship and make sure that you get a good 5 to 6 months window before the exam. And I think most of the companies, including mine, which is Pricewaterhouse, was very professional in this regard. And I remember I got a leave right in the first week of January. I had my last offsite in PwC when we went to Darjeeling in the month of December. Once we came back from the offsite, I never went back to office until after giving my exams. So I got a good 4 to 5 month window towards the end, which made it smooth, so to say. On the other part of the question which you had asked, which is whether it helps in getting a better job or better placement. So there are two parts to it. Number one, I don't think an articleship with a Lodha or Singhi would enable you to learn any less as compared to an articleship with PwC, as long as you are dedicated, disciplined, and you go forward with that. You go forward in doing your articleship with the utmost sincerity. I think it does not mean your learning is different in those two organizations. What is essentially different is the perception, and it is something that all of us face in different aspects as well. So as a recruiter, even you or I would now have a perception that a Lodha or Singhi would be better than a tier 3 CA firm. Similarly, a PwC or Deloitte would be better than a Lodha or Singhi CA firm. More so when you start crossing the state boundaries. So Lodha or Singhi would be a East India focused CA firm, whereas PwC would be a national level or global MNC, so to say. So I think the perception, the recognition and familiarity with the brand of where you have done your articleship does play a role. And I think that is instrumental in getting better placements or more opportunities at least.
Yeah, fair point. I think it's all about perception. It becomes far more easier. So for example, if you are from Xavier's, it becomes far easier for as an interviewer.
Exactly.
If interview is also from Xavier's, you feel okay, he's crossed some barriers. And one thing which I really feel jealous about the Big Four articleship is that in the third year, you get like this good 5-6 months of leave. Plus you get that stipend, which is like a handsome sum of money. It keeps getting credited without fail.
I think that's true. It might not sound like a lot of money to folks who have gone in the corporate world, have started earning salary. But I clearly remember at that point in time, the place we were in, after receiving a pocket money of 500 to 1,000 bucks a month, you end up in a role which starts offering you 9,000 rupees per month as the starting stipend, and which keeps on increasing. I don't know what the number is right now.
For you, how much was the third year stipend?
I think it was 20,000 to 25,000 rupees per month, somewhere around that.
That's a lot of money.
So yeah, I think at that point in time, it really felt like a kicker. It had a extra motivational boost for us.
Absolutely. So now in terms of your first major career transition, your transition into the storied world of management consulting. So how did your entry into BCG happen? So BCG typically, does it take only rank holders? Did you have a rank or did you manage without a rank? What is the typical entry process? There's no structured process. They don't come to ICI campus. They don't really offer mandates to like a job portal, like a CA job portal. Is it like completely network driven? How does this entire thing happen? What are the kind of interviews? Do they give cases, etc.? Just take us through this entire thing.
I think I had a lot of these questions when I started figuring out my way after clearing finals. I got a rank. I had an All India rank of 21 in the CA final. So then I realized how the process works, and it's something like this. BCG does not come to the campus. It does not hire any specific headhunter or recruiter or any other job portal for that matter. What it does is it essentially has started a CA recruitment program, which is an organized structured program, and it is run twice every year after the results of CA final are announced. And the CAs who are a part of BCG, who are working right now, would form a network and try and gather all the rank holders in a single WhatsApp group. That is the step one. And I got into a WhatsApp group in the same way and logic. All of us send our resumes and CVs to the HR over there, and they do a recruitment, they do a shortlisting process to reduce it to a list of 30 to 40 candidates whom they would want to interview. There is a 1 to 2 day interview process which runs with those 40 candidates, and they hire as many people as they feel would fit well into the form. They don't usually have a limit of 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. I have seen cycles where they have hired like 7, 8 people. I've seen cycles like mine where they had only 3 people. So I think it's more to do with how the interviews go and how they happen at that point in time. Now I think the black box surrounding this is twofold. Number one, if you don't have a rank, can you still get into BCG? So I think BCG has clarified this enough number of times in the subsequent years after I got in as well, which is if you get a rank in any of the 2 levels, which is inter or final, then you should be sharing your CV with us without any hesitation.
Oh yeah, we interviewed Sakshi. She was All India 1 in inter. She didn't get a rank in final. So
exactly. Right. So I think the policy is clear on that regard, because we also realize that getting a rank is something which is a mixture of a lot of many things, of which intelligence or capability is just one fraction. And it does not mean that those who do not have that intelligence or capability by any standard means or scale, right? Why do we use the criteria of rank then? It's a fair question. I don't think it's a ideal criteria. I don't think it's the just criteria. The best way would be to meet every candidate that is out there, but unfortunately the constraints of time and logistics will just not allow for that. And there has to be some metric, something which is objective and uniform and that can be used. So I think that is one. Second, in case I don't have a rank in either inter or final and I still want to do consulting, then how do you get into something like a BCG or McKinsey or AT Kearney for that matter? I think there are a couple of ways to go about it, and I've seen a lot of folks who have been able to do that as well. These are not the only consulting companies in India, just by the way. There are consulting companies which are focused specifically on sectors as well, specifically on verticals as well. There's a procurement consulting company. There is a education consulting company.
Parthanan, EY Parthanan.
Parthanan is there, LEK is there, AT Kearney is there. There are a lot of information consulting companies like ZS Associates, etc. So I think there is a whole host of universe of consulting companies out there. And sometimes a good way, if you can't get into an entry role at a BCG or McKinsey, a good way to go about that is you build your profile to become a good lateral hire for a firm like a BCG or McKinsey. And you can do that by spending time on the work that you want to do rather than focusing on the brand that you want to work with at times. So I think that's how the process runs at BCG. What do we look at CVs while shortlisting, which is another one of the very common questions. I think it's not a binary process. That if you got a rank below 30, you will be a no. If you got a rank above 20, it will be a definite yes. 20 to 30, it will be a maybe. Let's see. No, it's not like that. I think every CV is reviewed holistically. Every CV is reviewed in isolation and not as a comparative or as a not as peer benchmarking. I think it's reviewed to just see whether this is someone that the recruiter would feel comfortable in working with. And I think that's a human lens that we have. There is no software which runs down the number from 130 to 40. But yeah, I think they look for academic performance. They look for consistency in performance throughout your life, throughout your academic and professional journey. They look for places you have worked with and things that you have worked on. They look for if there is any X factor, if there are any extracurricular or out of the box things that you have done in your journey so far. And it just all goes into the CV to find out who would be the 40 folks.
Yeah, I think no company can give a specific equation like it is X, Y, Z. That cannot really happen.
That's true. It can't. And I am glad it cannot, because I think then we would all be filled up with robots and not humans. to get this
Yeah,
going.
I'm glad we are not robots. Then life would be very difficult. So then, what's your typical day in a BCG? What do you do there? You're always living out of a suitcase, airports.
I think that's, yeah, I
Hotels.
think that is one of the perks of being in a consulting company. I remember I had a case in Kolkata, and there were so many all-nighters on that particular case that I ended up staying in the hotel, even though I have home in Kolkata. So I think those are some of the perks which come with some of the all-nighters as well. So BCG as a consulting company has just one business vertical, which is management consulting, which is to help companies and management teams solve problems that they find challenging, and we can
So,
help
for
them out of.
example,
And
for example,
this could range from something like a turnaround project where you would be working with cross-functional teams across the organization to turn the business around. It could be going to a new market. For instance, you want to launch a product into the United States market, and you want a go-to-market strategy and implementation to happen. It could be a cost reduction program. There might be some non-core cost items which are ballooned in your P&L, and you want a way to structure them. It could be digital implementation. A lot of banks back to 3 to 4 years back were going on digital in terms of net banking, launching products, giving 60-second loans, etc. I think those kind of transformation journeys, which involve new age technologies, is something that we were deeply involved with. It could involve acquisition strategies, mergers and acquisitions, and you are a part of the M&A team at Aditya Birla yourself. So there are a lot of diligences which are required in any transaction, right? BCG could help you with the strategic or commercial diligence with one of those assets. So a whole host of problems. To boil it down to a single statement, anything that you find challenging for your team to do alone, we can come and help you. We can come and not just help you in strategizing, but even in implementing the project as well. I think
wow,
that's
sounds
about it.
very exciting. Yeah, but on a daily basis, I know it becomes very difficult to come out with something out of nothing. These
Yeah,
solutions.
true, true. I think it's not always so. As a part of consult, when I entered into consulting, one of the very common questions that even I had, and many people ask, is there is someone who is doing their business for 40 years, and you have come 2 years back or 3 years back, and you are talking about giving advice to someone who has been doing that for 40 years. Like, it does not make any intuitive sense. What's wrong? What's missing? And often I've realized that it's not just the number of years. I think there are a couple of things. Number one, fresh knowledge can always bring new insights. Number two, we have a global team, and we have partners who have spent like 40 years in procurement. So there might be someone who has spent 40 years in Aditya Birla Group as the CFO, but someone who has spent 40 years in procurement across 50 companies such as Aditya Birla Group. There is a lot of learnings that Aditya Birla Group can leverage from that partner that BCG would have. Third thing, I think it's often whenever there is an organization level change, and it's not a particular department level change or a particular section level change, it's often helpful when things or messages or insights come from a independent third party view. It dissolves a lot of the inter-company politics or intra-company politics that would happen and make things slow and bureaucratic, and subject the whole process to red tapeism. So I think it's not just innovative solutions that BCG comes up with. I think we come with a lot of great process, um, a lot of experience from other companies that we have worked with, and that is what makes the partnership between consultants and management teams work. It's never consultants helping management teams. It's rather them working together. That always has the best solution. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's something that I did not appreciate when I joined, and eventually with a couple of months of experience, things started sinking in.
Now, after like 1.25 years in management consulting, there came the more miraculous career transition of yours into private equity. And private equity is even better than investment banking because there is equal quantum of money, better work-life balance, which I reckon by my conversation with people. So you moved into Warburg as a CA without an MBA. Again, see, CA with an MBA nowadays becomes quite a common vehicle for entry, but a CA without an MBA, how did you enter? Were there entry barriers, interview processes, cases? You had case study rounds. What exactly was that? Take us through that, please.
Sure, sure. I think just a couple of pointers out there. I don't. So three things. Number one, I think private equity, investment banking, as well as consulting, both the three are extremely prestigious and coveted jobs. And I think whether a person stays there or not is highly dependent upon the willingness of the person in terms of whether he enjoys doing the role that he has. There are many consultants who have hated private equity jobs, and there are many bankers who have hated private equity jobs. And similarly, there are many private equity investors who would hate a consultant's job or a investment banker's job. So I think uh, I wouldn't I wouldn't see it as a ladder where A is better more than B and B is more than C. I think it didn't work out that way with a lot of people whom I know and whom I interact with. In terms of process, I think private equity as a industry has evolved over the last 6 to 7 years in India. Um, and I think in part because of increasing investments in the country, and in part also because the firms started experimenting with their organization structure to figure out what is the best way to to have a lean dynamic team. So one typical thing about private equity organizations, as you would know, they are lean organizations in terms of manpower. They might be having an AUM of $5 billion, but they might end up having only 15 or 20 people on their workforce, right? And that is what makes the economics of getting into a private equity firm a bit challenging, because there would always be 100 consultants who would get hired in a typical year, and there would be maybe 20 or 25 private equity positions that would open up, and of those 100, 60 might be willing to do. So coming back to my process, I think Warburg Pincus, along with many other private equity funds at that point in time, had started running pre-MBA associate programs. As I had mentioned, there is a good chance that someone who gets into private equity starts realizing that private equity is not what he or she wants to do, and that is why all private equity firms now, or at least most of the private equity firms now, have a structured pre-MBA program where candidates join from various fields, primarily consulting and investment banking, and they spend 2 years with the firm as a pre-MBA associate. After the end of 2 years, the firm would encourage the candidates to go and get their MBA, and then decide whether they want to come back to the firm, or they want to go back to a different investing firm, or they want to do consulting or something else in their life altogether. I got placed with Warburg Pincus as a pre-MBA associate, which was a 2-year role when I joined, and this was in March 2018. Um, the process is quite simple for these guys. I think all of the private equity firms who have a pre-MBA role try to typically do a reach out to consultants and bankers who are in their first, second, and third year in the respective organizations, and they try to organize a large meeting with them. In these meetings, they would typically try to explain what private equity is as an industry, what the job requires, what would their 2 years look like, who have been the folks who have spent 2 years in the past, and where are they right now, just to educate consultants. Why is it important? I think it's very important to understand here is, as a consultant, I never wanted to move anywhere other than BCG. I was really enjoying my time at BCG. I started becoming comfortable in the skin of a consultant. I wasn't even proactively looking forward to a switch in the industry, in my industry choice. And 1.25 years is very short. When someone asks me today, I recommend them spend at least 2 years in consulting. It is one of those decisions which was one of the toughest decisions I had to make back then, and I was still not sure whether it's the right thing to switch at such an early stage in consulting career. And that is why it is important for private equity firms to educate potential candidates quite enormously as to what they are getting into, so that they can make a much more informed, better choice when they move from already a great place like BCG or McKinsey or iBanking organization into a private equity organization. Now, the question here, though, Anurag, which arises is, what happens if I'm not in a consulting organization? What happens if I'm not in an investment banking organization? And I think it again ties back to the same point which we discussed on consulting as well. There are alternative ways that one should figure out. it might be difficult to get into a pre-MBA associate role unless you are in consulting or iBanking or some other investing organization. Let's say if I'm in a completely different role, let's say I'm working in this with the CFO of Tata Steel, as your experience was, right? And I have modeling experience, and I feel that I'm comfortable, doing financial modeling, and I can make investing decisions, and I can learn, if not make them yet. And I should get a chance in private equity, and that is something which is very fair as well. I think those skill set is something which would fit in well in a pre-MBA associate role at a private equity firm. But the chances get really, really thin unless it's the channel of consulting or investment banking, just because of the design of the structure again. And in those situations, I would just recommend that it's not necessarily important to get into a private equity investing at the very beginning. There are other investing themes or investing firms that you can start with. You can start with equity research organizations, because that starts becoming a good pool. You can start becoming a part of these organizations because these organizations will let you interact with private equity folks on the other end. I have quite a few examples in my friend circle and in my family, folks who were at Credit Suisse, folks who were at CLSA doing equity research, folks in ICICI Securities, folks in Jefferies. All these are big equity research houses where one could get into without the consulting or investment banking experience, and that can be a good stepping stone to get into a private equity experience. And all the folks that I spoke about in those 4 equity research organizations are right now with the likes of Premji Invest or Morgan Stanley Private Equity, and so on and so forth.
Fantastic.
So I think don't stop if you really feel that private equity is your calling, or it's something that you want to at least try and explore. Don't stop just because you don't have the resume with someone who is in there has. Just try to work your way around, because there are certain ways around. Just try to work your way around. It might take a year or 2 more. It might take a bit more effort, but it might help you land the job that you want in that space.
Yeah, and I think networking will also play a very important role here. You need to stay connected. So for example, I get connected with you and say, hey Devang, I'm on the lookout for something. If there is something in the next 1 year, please let me know. And maybe there is an opportunity which suddenly comes up. You have a vacancy, you have to fill it, and you'll say, hey Anurag, are you willing?
Definitely,
something of that
definitely.
sort can happen probably, right? Okay.
Yes. I think equity research organizations, the typical benefit is you get to network and interact a lot. You get to present your research reports to investors across the country and sometimes across the globe. And I think that puts you in a position where you can actually showcase your talent and your grit in forming a good investment opinion.
Yeah, I can completely vouch for that. Last week we had like a AVP of research at ICICI Securities, Bhupinder Tiwari, and the kind of networking you have, it is a classic case for a PE to actually look at such profile. Now coming to PE, now a lot of people are confused between private equity and investment banking. See, for the uninitiated, it is like, where is the more money, which is more suitable from a work-life balance perspective, and what exactly is the difference in work hours, compensation, etc. And are the rules of the game different in investment banking and private equity? So who is more happy probably?
I think the answer would be I think it's a very tricky question. I honestly think the basis for understanding the difference should not be work hours or pay, or I think the first basis should be, what exactly do these folks do? Like, what do they do? And I think that's where the crux of the understanding lies. So consulting, as you rightly mentioned, we help management solve problems, right? That's a simple way to put it. What do private equity investors do? Private equity investors simply find opportunities where they can put money in and they can make good returns. What does good mean? Good means anything which would be better than the rates that you would make on a debt instrument, right? Or anything that it would rather mean anything that you would naturally make on a mutual fund.
But like 25-30% IRR is what and PE generally
people in India, because of the currency depreciation and other issues as well, aim typically north of 20% returns. And in general, across the globe, the metric would be, if you perform better than the mutual funds or the general S&P market indices, then you would be a good investor. And the better you perform, the more further on the spectrum you go, right? So that is what private equity folks do. They simply find opportunities that they can invest in and make good money. What do investment bankers do? And I think this is where it's important to understand that investment bankers don't put in money. They rather help companies, on the other hand, raise money, or they would help investors find companies to invest in. So they typically act as the middlemen who help the investor marry a portfolio company, so to say. And that is where their role comes in. In terms of work life, I don't think all the three jobs are intense, without a doubt. I think consulting jobs work on a deal by deal basis. So there are tough cases. There are cases which involve variable pay, where there are a lot of all-nighters. In investment banking, it is deal by deal basis again, where whenever there is a mandate, and when I say mandate, I mean whenever there is a company which is engaged with a banker to find prospective investors or to raise a certain number of million of dollars, right? In those cases, it's all-nighters for them. And for private equity investors, whenever there is a live deal opportunity that you're working on, you're trying to figure out whether it's a right bet or not, whether you're trying to figure out whether the diligence findings make sense or not. And those are the times which you have to pull all-nighters. So there are all-nighters in all the three jobs. In my experience, I think, and I don't have a lot of experience actually to say whether 1.25 years of consulting is better than 2.5 years of investing, right? But in my experience, I think as long as you feel that you're fitting in, you will enjoy, and those all-nighters won't bother you as much. But the moment you start feeling that it's not really the calling, that's when it starts bothering and starts becoming like weekend ko bhi kaam karna hai, ya wapas Monday aa gaya, and so on and so forth. Not to say that I don't hate Mondays. There are Mondays which I hate as well. There are shitty parts in the job that I do as well. But I think that comes with every job. So the idea is not to figure out how bad hours would be. I think there would be all-nighters everywhere. It's to just figure out where you can spend all-nighters and feel comfortable with the pay that you get at the end of the month.
Yeah, brings me to the good question. What is the kind of pay people get in private equity? Is it like variable, fixed, and deal based? So investment banking, I know for a fact that it is also linked to the kind of money that you earn on the deals executed during the year. So
That's right.
in private equities also, is it like on exits when you make a lot of money, does the team get a lot of money? Is it?
I think, yeah, I think that's a very good question, Anurag. I think there's not a lot of visibility when I was entering the industry on the pay structure, at least not on the pay structure of the entire firm, so to say. So typically all private equity funds have limited partners who contribute money to a corpus, which becomes the fund out of which private equity investors invest in. And there is always a fee-based arrangement with limited partners where there is a certain fee on the committed capital which Warburg Pincus earns, and beyond that there is performance fees associated with performance of the fund that we invest from, right? In terms of rewarding its employees, private equity companies have a nature and a tendency to generally let everyone participate in the profits that everyone is helping create. So the bonus elements in all private equity organizations would be quite big as compared to a consulting company, let's say. So when I was a consultant, my pay would have 20% to 25% of my total pay would be coming from the variable chunk. When I talk about private equity, the number jumps up to 40% or maybe as high as 50% in some cases. And I think that's one of the key differences where your fortunes start getting tied more and more to the firm performance as such, which is often a good thing, and people often get to experience it as they grow within a certain organization. In private equity firms, I think that starts quite earlier as compared to some of the other companies.
Does that cause stress? That
it does not cause. It does not. Yeah. So I think one thing to remember in private equity is your decisions live with you, and you have to live with your decisions rather, right? In management, let's say you have had a bad case. The case didn't work out for some reason. Your hypothesis didn't turn out to be as you had thought, and you move on to the next case, right? It does not help if there are a lot of bad cases back to back. Of course, but you still move on. In investing, let's say you make a bad investment, right? Now, investments can go bad because of many reasons. Maybe you made a good decision, but markets turned bad, or the company had a specific issue which you could have foreseen at the time of investment. But no matter what happens, that investment and that decision stays with you. And that is one thing to understand. And it does not increase stress particularly, but it does increase the accountability. Now, for some, accountability may ultimately turn into stress as well. Difficult for me to say. I think it's difficult to even generalize that statement. But yeah, I think accountability increases, and that makes you more on your toes. And
yeah, I agree, because last week, like I had Bhupinder, he's like a sell side research analyst at ICICI. So he gives advice, but he's saying
yes,
that the mutual fund guy who actually puts in his money on the basis of this advice, he's got a far greater skin in the game. And if the
exactly.
stock does not perform well, for him, it's just like, okay, a target price went amiss. But in the process, the buy side has actually lost $1 million maybe. So
That's true,
you've
and
got,
that's the exact reason, Anurag, why you will see that because of difference in accountability, because of differences in the intensity of the decisions that you make, the pay scale is also different, and that is something that everyone keeps in mind and that is also the reason why many people would not prefer to have a job in private equity as well. So you rightly mentioned from your conversation with Bhupinder that it's something that there is more skin in the game for an investor. That's true.
yeah, and now the kind of startup, they're falling like dominoes. So there'll be so much money which is going to get lost. And I think private equity will be still insulated because you enter into a startup at a far more mature stage, like Series
Yes,
B, Series.
I I agree that I think there is a difference between VC investors who would put in early stage companies or Series A and Series B investments, whereas private equity firms who typically enter at a growth stage when the unit models are typically proven out. However, having said that, I think the lines are getting more and more blurred between these two investments. There are good tech investments or bets that even private equity firms take in Series A or Series B as well. In my experience in Warburg, I have set up platforms which are like startups, and we were the first investors in the company, so to say. So I think the lines are getting blurred, but I still feel that in all times of crisis there lies an opportunity, and private equity investors in India have seen cycles play out many times now. Warburg has been an investor in the country in 1990s, and it has seen the cycles play out enough number of times to be mature enough to not have knee-jerk reactions to the current situation. I think it's the time to partner with the entrepreneurs, partner with the businessmen that you have backed, and just give them the comfort and support that, okay, I'm not a lender, I'm not a market investor, I am a private equity investor, and I can stand behind you. And as long as this business, the unit economics still hold good, we can even support you further. And that is the kind of confidence that private equity investors should now be giving, and entrepreneurs should now be willing to have more investors, more private equity investors in their cap table as well.
Yeah, and as we spoke, I was just looking at your website of Warburg Pincus, $83 billion over the past 50 years that have been invested. $83 billion, 895 companies and 40 countries. You need to be really having like a huge foresight and maturity to stay with the entrepreneur through all cycles. I mean, you really can't be that short-termism, Kabuli wala, who wants the interest or will just
Yes,
extract a pound of flesh.
that's very true, and I think that is what differentiates Warburg Pincus and a few other private equity firms as well. And that is why I have seen entrepreneurs who really work well with us because of this partnership approach itself.
And does your work today also involve a lot of financial modeling?
Yes, I think about it as this way. For all the work that you do, the tangible output is the financial model that you create. Financial model is not a process in itself. It is rather something like a blast furnace which takes inputs from many things that you do to understand whether this is a good bet or not. And the financial model is just a culmination of all those things. For instance, if you realize that, okay, the land that you're buying has some issue with the soil, and there needs to be more soil filling that needs to be done. I'm taking a random example. You will incorporate the impact of that in your model. Okay, this is an additional cost that I have to make. Or you do a research and you realize that the market size is only so big in this particular area. And you will do a calculation in your model to make sure that the revenue numbers that you have don't exceed the market size, or rather is a percentage of that, right? So I think financial model will continue to remain a blast furnace concept for an investor at any level that you will speak to.
Yeah,
whatever we do is goes into
a lot of sensitivities, the data tables to talk about those.
Oh yes, I think in the uncertain world that we live in, I think it's difficult for anyone to make a prediction, especially given the recent circumstances, even more so. So I think we love to have different scenarios play out and see what happens in which scenario.
Absolutely.
So that as well.
So, Devang, now how does life in Singapore? So, you recently shifted to Singapore office of Warburg Pincus, is it? So, how?
So I've joined the Singapore office, but I've joined it remotely while continue to be in Kolkata because of the lockdown restrictions. So I was planning to earlier travel on in the second half of March, which is when things went from bad to worse. And since then, I've been in Kolkata working with the Singapore team remotely. And the Singapore team, as well as many of the other teams across our global offices, are now working from home. So hoping to get to Singapore and see things get better. But for now, staying at home.
Okay. So now heading towards the last part of this thing. So if you were to unwind a day, because your day would be chock-a-block with con calls and then modeling and so many PPTs probably and calls again. How do you unwind? What's your mantra for fun and fitness?
Sure. I think that is something which is very important in all our jobs, right? And so here's the thing. Talk about fitness, and even I have had my swings on the weight tracker from the lows to the highs, then back to the lows, then again to the highs. And I think fitness is definitely working towards your fitness is definitely one of the great ways to unwind. But not many people can do it, or not many people can do it consistently, and that's an issue. So I do try and go for a jog or for a run every now and then. That's really one way to unwind. But more importantly, I think while staying at home for the last couple of months, I have also realized there are other things, other simple things that do help me unwind. I've realized that having meals with someone often does a great to unwinding rather than having meals alone. And this involves breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all the meals. At the same time, I've also realized that
माँ के हाथ की रोटी after a long time.
In fact, even in Mumbai, when माँ के हाथ की रोटी नहीं भी थी, माँ के हाथ की रोटी तो obviously, I think without a doubt. And even in Mumbai, when that luxury was not there, having a meal with the flatmates would help unwind more than anything ever did at that point in time, right? Just having someone to talk to when you come back, or even when you're having your dinner in office, I think just having it with a colleague does a lot for my unwinding process, at least. Similarly, I think the second thing that really helps me unwind is writing, and I think it's a habit that many people have to write in a diary. I don't have a diary of sorts, but I do enjoy writing specific paragraphs or snippets or certain lines from any book that I'm reading. So if you would take 12 hours to read a book, it would take me a week, simply because I'll find 50 different things to write from the book in a separate diary or in a separate book. That really does help me unwind. So
Which book are you reading now? Last book that you read?
I think it's still right now right in front of me. Struggling to find time to read more and more of it. It's a book by Yuval Noah Harari, 21 Lessons About the 21st Century.
Show us the thing on this laptop.
Sure. I think this book was gifted to me by one of the colleagues.
21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Wow. Is it like a futuristic book?
No, actually, this particular author is an Israeli author, and he has had a couple of bestsellers before this, which I absolutely loved reading. And I would recommend everyone who's watching this to read *Sapiens*, which is the first book that I read from this particular author. It's a lovely book. He again really *Sapiens* talked about the history of humankind.
Okay.
And then he released another book which was *Homo Deus*, which I also read, which talks about the future of humankind. And when I say history and future, it means going back to as back as 2.5 lakh years from now, and it starts from there. So quite an interesting read. This particular book captures the today and now of things.
Oh.
So it talks about 21 lessons for today, not the history, not the future. I've spoken a lot about those things in my other books. Let's talk about here and now. And that's what this book is centered on.
Fantastic.
Sure.
So final question, Devang. Devang, now that you've seen this world, a world where you've been on this side of the river where other people want to enter, what is your message to such aspirants? How do you cross the bridge? And then, what is your message through this show, that in case people are, so it's an attention deficit audience, 1 minute is a long time today. So we are probably far more than the 22 minutes that you had allotted. Your message to friends like Rishabh, who've been through your highs and lows, maybe, some lines.
I think Rishabh and I go way long back. उसको मैं हमेशा हमारी बातों में गालियां ज़्यादा होती है, तो I think वो तो मैं याद दे नहीं पाऊंगा. But I think great guy, great friend. I want to thank him for introducing the two of us. Love the opportunity to be on this particular chat show. Great initiative by you, by the way. And kudos to you again on that. On the first part of your question, it's difficult to concisely put it, but I think the first 2 or 3 things which come to my mind when I think about someone who is an aspirant or CA aspirant or looking forward to working in consulting or private equity or investment banking in the coming years, I think number one is in general, and this is not just for these jobs, but in general, it's very important to not be hesitant to ask questions, not be hesitant to put yourself forward in situations when you wish to. And I think once that fearlessness comes, and by fearlessness, I do not mean taking any rash decisions, but rather just being there or asking the questions that you want to ask rather than hesitating to do so. That's one. The second would be, in my experience, I've realized that in the first few weeks, months of starting anything new, be it a job, be it a career choice, be it a hobby, and something like starting a chat show as well, things will be difficult. They are bound to be. And think about those times as your testing times, and think about it as that's the biggest hurdle you have to cross. It happened with me when I was with Pricewaterhouse. Like it started happening with me when I was in Kota actually. That was the first time I did not realize, and I came back. It again happened when I joined PwC. At the end of second month, I was like, यार बहुत काम करा रहे हैं, कोई बोल दे कि छोड़ दो तो छोड़ देंगे. But then you be at it, and then you don't stop, and then you keep fighting, and you continue pushing, and you realize that common sense and attitude, if those two things stay with you, you will get through it. It happened in BCG as well. I remember in the first month I had to travel 3 months outside the city of Mumbai to a factory, and out of a team of 7 consultants who were working on the job, I was the only one who was traveling to factory. And those were the first 2.5 months of my BCG. And until my first feedback, appraisal and review happened, I was always doubting if I'm doing the right thing or not. And it was a tough time, but all those instances have made me realize that it's very important to push through the first few weeks, months of anything that you start with. And the last thing which I already mentioned is, wherever you want to reach in life, your common sense, your attitude is more than enough. But attitude in itself is quite a big word. It involves discipline, determination, grit, passion, never give up attitude, being hardworking, and so many other things. But think about it as a single word, and you'll realize what I'm talking about. And it's always important to make sure that in case you don't have a qualification, or you don't have the right experience on the CV, or you don't have the right pointer, does not stop you as long as you have your attitude and your common sense with you. And I think that's something, if you remember, it will just push you to work hard and make sure that you reach where you want to reach. That's important.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a wonderful words of advice. You remind me of this movie Fashion, where Priyanka Chopra had once come to Mumbai from a small town and somehow just couldn't like it and went back. And then her father told, go back and conquer that world. Otherwise, it's going to remain a dent on you forever. So for you, like, you've created this quota experience of yours into a magic moment of your life. So thank
That's
you
true.
so much for being candid about that. I'm sure, people come on shows, just talk about their successes, the highs, but to come across as a candid
Oh
experience
yes,
here, right?
I remember a joke about that. I think someone told me that someone was an all-star, A achiever, everything, cleared everything at the first go, got ranks, superb profile, the best resume one could ever have, went into an interview, and someone asked me, what would you do if you fail in a situation?
I didn't know that, right? So that becomes quite a
So yeah,
challenge.
I think let our mistakes teach us more than our successes do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Devang. It's been a pleasure having you on the
Thank
show.
you. Thank you,
And
Anurag. Thanks a
for
lot for
those
having
who,
me.
yeah, so those who would want to be in touch, maybe you can send him a connect request on LinkedIn. Don't pester him for getting a job in private equity. It takes time, it
Please,
needs a skill set. But yeah, no,
but
last time that
please do reach
happened.
out with any questions. I
Uh,
can imagine. I think there are a lot of questions out there. Please reach out in case there are any questions. I might take some time to revert, but I'll definitely try to revert to as many of you as possible.
sure. So thank you so much, Devang. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you, Anurag. Have a nice day. Stay
Sure.
safe.
Bye.